This is the Inclusivity EQ Podcast with Saul Gomez, the show that takes you around the world to share interviews with some of the most successful and relevant people on the planet. Hear their stories and get the most important business lessons they've learned on their road to success, and get exclusive access on how to implement their success into your life and business. The Inclusivity EQ Podcast is brought to you by the Strategic Advisor Board and your host, Saul Gomez.
Welcome to the Inclusivity EQ Podcast, where we explore the power of and impact of inclusion across various industries and in this thing called life. I'm your host, Saul Gomez, and today we have the privilege of speaking with Mr. Michael Richards, a seasoned entrepreneur and business strategist whose passion for community development has guided his remarkable career, not only in the civilian sector, but also in the military. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Likewise, it's always a treat talking to you. I noticed in your bio you didn't include the military piece. Any particular reason, or you just the humble Mike that I've known for years?
I'm just a humble Mike. I mean, it was an honor to serve, and it serves as a foundation for a lot of the things that I've done throughout life. But yeah, it's I don't hang my hat on service. It's just my ability to serve. So,
listen, man, it's one thing I've always admired about you over the years is how you create space for others and give people a platform and give people the space, to have their own shine, and that's never lost on me. So thanks for that. But in this case, we are going to talk about you, and hope to get some insights, and just, from a lens of inclusion. And so I'd like to start off with, early career and your leadership development. So you've had an impressive career spanning, and I'm not trying to date you here, but spanning over 3 decades, primarily focused on leadership development and community organizing. Share with us some of the key moments and experiences that's shaped your journey, both personally and professionally, and how inclusion's played a part in all that.
Well, I'll tell you, going back to, early on, my background growing up, I grew up in Pittsburgh, a shot in a beer kind of city. I'm a Gen X guy. So, back when there were steel mills and things like that. So, that was kind of my foundation. If you don't work, you don't eat, those types of things. And, from there, transitioning to military service, as I said at the opening, how that was really foundational for me to understand diversity and how teams work outside of sports and things that you do as a youth. But for me, it was really looking at each individual having a role, and then that whole melting pot. Community wise, since I was little, I can recall watching on television civil rights movements and marches and things like that, and always wanting to be part of something larger than myself. So, when we look at our geopolitical or our socio-political status today, a lot of the things that we find challenge with is a lack of appreciation for those differences and the ability to be able to include people from many, many backgrounds to give them voice. And that's been the foundation for me is just to be able to provide that voice.
Interesting. And I'm glad you brought that up, right? The inclusive piece. And I want to get a little bit into that leadership development, right? That's kind of that was cultivated. And it seems like it's been a cornerstone in your career. Now, but before that, tell me a little bit, from your perspective, what does inclusion mean to you, to the point of what does it sound like? What does it look like? What does it even feel like?
Wow, that's a great question. I think that for me, looking at inclusion is really being able to flatten opportunities. And what I mean by flatten opportunities is the ability to be able to give people from different backgrounds an opportunity to participate in the collective. And that's not just, in the business workplace, but that's across the full spectrum, especially in community planning or community development, when you're looking at key stakeholders and identifying what those stakeholders are across the board. What value everyone brings to the table, because I believe that, everyone has a voice. And at some point, that contribution of that voice makes the end state better. So if it's community organizing where we're looking at a development or a new housing development, or we're looking at a new social program, and not just from the human aspect, or human services aspect, but even on a larger scale of looking at what we do across the board is, stakeholders have to have a voice, and inclusion means that you're giving those stakeholders equal opportunity to contribute whatever skill set that they have or bring their ideas to bear.
Even then, right, I want to park there a little bit, because you made me think about something when it comes to community development, right, and stakeholders. Not only that, but it's alignment, right? It's aligning the resources to the needs, right? Is there even need for this resource? And the only way to do that is by including the recipients or the beneficiaries of that resource, right? Of that opportunity. And I think a lot of times, I think that's definitely an area of improvement. Where are we bringing everyone in the table? Is everyone being included that has a voice or that may benefit or not, right? How is it going to impact everyone? And then at least consider that.
Absolutely. I mean, I see a lot of, in my current role now, I see a lot of times where, across the spectrum, if it's a government agency or city planners, or a community development corporation, right down to residents of a respective community, having that voice where oftentimes, folks are excluded from that process. If you recall in the service, we used to say, the good idea fairies would come and say, this is the way it's going to be. And it wasn't, everybody bringing their voice, the individuals who would be mostly impacted, typically didn't get a voice. It was, this is what it's going to be. Now let's figure out how to make it work. And I don't think that's a model of inclusion. I think it's just the opposite. I think it's exclusion.
No, absolutely.
So bringing in those individuals who now have a voice, because they're the individuals who are going to be impacted by decisions. So, and that's in corporate America, that's in government, that's across the board, and then social services as well.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings me back to, I'll circle back and close this loop here. Because it's a very individualistic thing, right? Making the choice to be inclusive before you even try and foster it. So from your perspective and in your experience and your, area of cognizance and in your leadership journey, how do you approach cultivating those leadership skills, of inclusivity within yourself and by extension in others?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm to coin a phrase, I'm a Coveyite. I'm a firm believer in Steve Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It was something that I read when I was in the service, and it has just stuck with me ever since. And one of those habits is to begin with the end in mind. And as a result, for whatever operation or endeavor that I've been involved in, I've always looked at reverse engineering, and it works the same way for leadership development. It works the same way for community development. It works the same way for our housing and our projects and programs that we do, is that we begin with the end in mind, and understanding that means, who are going to be the benefactors of whatever that initiative is. How do we develop leaders who are going to bring forth a servant leadership mindset? There was a company that I was affiliated with many years ago, and their corporate logo was an inverted pyramid, where leadership was at the bottom, and it was always about pushing up people. The author of a book, Art Williams, wrote the book, Pushing Up People, and it really talked about how you can support, future leaders, but you do that understanding what their respective goals are, and then you tailor your activities to meet that need, and doing such in a holistic aspect, not just, ticking off tick marks, if you will.
Right. I'm I'm kind of chuckling inside here, because that was such a great explanation about servant leadership, and I chuckle because not always, but often enough, I come across leaders or even managers who take or perceive the term servant leadership with a negative connotation, and it's not that the leader is subservient or that the leader is a servant to, and with a negative connotation. I think you put it really beautifully, that you're uplifting your people, right, as a leader, so that you can upskill them, so you can elevate them. And so I think that's too many times a misconception that servant leadership is a bad thing, and it's really not.
No, absolutely not. And that's from a faith perspective or a secular perspective, that it's really about understanding, and it's not projecting. And I think that a lot of leaders, and I separate that from managers. Again, going back to military service, Admiral Grace Hopper says, you manage things, you lead people.
Yeah.
And understanding that difference, business schools galore teach or use leadership and management interchangeably, and they're not. They're very distinctively different.
Right.
But to the point, leadership, servant leadership, is identifying what are those motivators for the individual and then helping them. So in a community aspect, when we do leadership development in the community, we're looking at what those respective goals are. And there may be some shaping, but that's where the training comes into aspect. That's the development phase for mentorship. So there may be some shaping, but understanding and clarification of those respective goals. Not everybody's driven by money. Not everybody's driven by prestige. Not everybody's driven by a multitude of things, but it's understanding what those motivators are. What are those hot buttons? And then developing an individual to achieve their dreams, their goals, their aspirations.
No, absolutely. And, I think to that point, right, when you talk about entrepreneurship and successful entrepreneurs, right, I've often heard business owners saying, if I, as a business owner, am not the hardest working person, there's something wrong going on here, right? Because I'm the one that has the most skin in the game. It's my business. And so from that perspective, and as an entrepreneur, and when we talk about success and innovation, all those things that require of an entrepreneur, in your journey, your entrepreneurial spirit, from what I know of you, has led you to establish yourself as a very well-respected leader and innovator, and in no small part because of the servant leadership that you possess, that you exert, that you emote. So how has inclusion played a role in that, in the achievements and contributions that you're proud of, and what are some of the ones that you're the most proud of?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that we've done, and thank you for that, man. It means a lot coming from you, because I've known you for years. I've always respected you. I think that what it is, Saul, is that, in any enterprise that I've been a part of, especially from an entrepreneurial standpoint, obviously I bring forth an idea, and I've been able and been very fortunate, very blessed that I've been able to surround myself with individuals who are like-minded, not necessarily who think the exact same way as me, but understand the process of the goal, how we're going to get there. And I've been able to articulate the vision, and then individuals who are interested, by finding out what role they can play and amplifying that experience. So, for example, what we do at MHR Holdings, I've got guys who are part of the team who have certain aspects that just matter to them more than anything. It's that social services aspect, the fact that, we're able to get individuals who otherwise would not be able to get into a home. We're able to build homes and be able to help them through all aspects, financing. And as a private equity developer, that's very unique. But the financing aspect, being able to add the financial literacy aspect, the home maintenance. We do all of that, and that's part of a program or a package. So it's having individuals who buy in, understanding what's important to them, and then allowing them to do their part without getting in the way. The key to the success that I've had is that I've always had leaders around me who have mentored, counseled, developed, and shaped but have always allowed me to make my own mistakes,
right, and
then course correct. And I've been able to do that in business as well. We're not a Fortune 500 company, but we do okay. And we've been able to do okay because,
right,
the C-suite does its thing. They make mistakes, and we make mistakes daily, but we're able to recover.
I'm gonna audible here for a little bit, because you said something just now, and I do want to go back a little bit as well. But you said something, that you're allowed to make mistakes. You can make mistakes, and that, to me, I think about psychological safety, and especially resilience, because it's only when we make those mistakes and when we're able to bounce back that creates that resilience. But lacking psychological safety, how can we feel safe to make mistakes if an organization or if the leadership is risk adverse? How can we ever learn? How can we ever truly be resilient? And so that's something that's always stood out to me. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think there's this notion that, oh, you're a C-suite leader or you're successful, it's because you don't make mistakes. Absolutely not. At least for me, a lot of my success I attributed to my failures, because I've learned. I've truly learned, right? And it's made me, I think, a good student, a better student. I listen more. I'm more intently about things, and I tend to be a little bit more meticulous about things. How has that worked for you from that perspective of making mistakes and psychological safety? What's your take?
I lead by a quote that I found years ago by Winston Churchill that says, failure is seldom fatal. Success is seldom final. It's courage that counts. And for me, that speaks volumes in how you approach that to develop that safety, understanding that, at the end of the day, and there are situations where, in military service, you come to understand that there are situations where, failure can be fatal. But in life in general, it rarely is. If we break something, then we can fix it, especially if we understand how we broke it. It's an opportunity to learn and grow. And understanding that we're always looking at growing, we're always looking at getting better, we're always looking at finding ways to innovate and develop, it's not fatal. And, we can get through it. And at least at my firm, we've created that mindset, and not driven by me alone, just the people that I have around me, who've all come to bear the same mindset. We found success in doing that. We're not afraid to fail.
Well, we
learn from it.
And I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It's not just you saying it, it's people doing it, right? That I think is a litmus test. When it's walked out, when you can see it, you don't have to speak to it because you see it, you experience it, you feel it, you hear it, right? I somebody told me a story once about, there was this guy, a really successful guy, and he goes into his boss's office. He's like, "Hey boss, mea culpa, I made a $7 million mistake." And the boss turns around and says, "Great. You just had a $7 million lesson. Go fix it and make sure that it's valuable and that it pays dividends. Have a good one."
Absolutely. It's creating a culture.
It is.
And it more so than just an environment. It is, an environment means that you can make the mistake. And I think that in that example, that $7 million mistake might have been the end of his career. But if you create a culture that says that you can fail and recover, the expectation is that you have to do something to recover. You absolutely have to fix it. But the fixing is the learning.
Absolutely.
How do you problem solve? How do you get through that? How do you break down the parts or the components to get better? And it's, again, creating a culture of understanding, and that safety is rooted in that culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's, over the years, it's never ceased to amaze me. Just, I've always seen you as this all-knowing fountain of wisdom, if you will, right? If we're talking about our Navy days, just the innovative approach to do things that has driven a lot of your success. And to that point, I've got a compound question for you. One, what do you attribute that innovative approach to? And secondly, what would you say to someone who wants to stay ahead of that curve and navigating this ever-changing landscape of business and community development? And by extension, what role does inclusion play in all that?
Well, from a leadership standpoint, you got to understand right off the bat that leadership's a contact sport.
Okay.
You're going to take hits, and you have to be prepared for that. And, above all, I think that is the first and foremost. And understanding the second part of that is that servant leadership. Mm-hmm. So, for all the guts and glory, come the pain. So there's going to be that aspect of it. And I think that across my experience, I've seen both. I've seen success. Scripture tells us from whom much is given, much is asked. And, that's a mindset. Let me get the second part of your question.
Yeah. So what would you say to someone who's trying to stay ahead of that curve, right? Navigating this ever-changing landscape of business, and how would they incorporate inclusion in all that?
Don't focus on being ahead of it. Be a part of it.
Say more about that, please.
We get caught up on trying to be ahead of the curve all the time. Who's got the next widget? Who's got the next bright idea?
Mm-hmm.
Who's got the, and I don't think I think that's the wrong focus. I think that's the wrong approach.
Mm-hmm.
And again, going back to my firm, we all have the great ideas. But again, we're beginning with the end in mind. So, we look at broad spectrum of our stakeholders and bringing your stakeholders to bear where they bring their ideas. That will lead innovation. That will keep you ahead of the curve without focusing on what's around the curve. If you live in the moment, you experience the moment. If you're always focused on what's around the curve, you never get the chance to enjoy the journey. And from an inclusion standpoint, it is making sure that folks understand that it is not what's around the curve that's a threat. It is the moment that you're in. Live in the moment. It will carry you around the bend.
It's got to be. I even for you, right, as a business owner, it's got to be. I always wonder how do you balance that, right? Because as a business owner, right, as a leader, you have to have foresight, right? You have to think ahead. But how do you balance that and being present? And I say that because when we're present, when we're in there, right, good, bad, or indifferent, especially when it's bad, when we get to the other side of it, I think there's value add. There's more gratitude. There's more appreciation, right? And I grew up poor. And I'm not rich by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm a lot better than what I've ever been and what I ever dreamed of. And I have such a deep sense of gratitude for it, not because I can go buy nice things, but, buying groceries, paying a bill. It's such a gratifying feeling because I know what it's like not to be able to. And it's because I had no choice at the time, right? I was poor and I was poor and I was poor. But I think being present in all that gives you a sense of, I don't know. It's irreplicable. You can't teach that. You have to experience it.
Absolutely. And I think that what you said right there summarizes kind of what I was saying, and that is being present in the moment. I mean, you and I have similar upbringings. I certainly didn't grow up rich by any stretch. There was no silver spoon in my house at all. However, I can look back and appreciate that time. I mean, did I want to accumulate wealth and things and all of that? Yeah, there was a time in life where that was important. However, going through the process, going through the struggles, going through the ups, going through the downs, is what set the foundation. I think that's what was most important. So being present in the moment, understanding, learning, taking advantage of being in that moment, seeing it for the blessing that it is, and then moving beyond. I think that is what creates that innovation. What's the old saying about innovation is looking at necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah.
So, you create that innovation comes out of necessity, but the necessity is only defined by the moment.
Right. Absolutely.
You don't forecast and go, hey, I'm going to need a new widget 10 years from now. Well, you may, because today you understand where you are in the present. So I tell folks, especially in folks that I mentor and work with, is that don't miss the moments.
Right. Absolutely. That's, it's so insightful, man. And thanks for sharing that. I'd like to delve a little bit, right. Into your current role as kind of, we get into the segment of it is all that we've been talking about, right. In your current role and any particular accomplishments that you're most proud of. Cause I'm really giddy about hearing that. But before that, I need to pay a couple bills. And I'd like to give a shout out to our Strategic Advisor Board, our sponsors for this platform. So a bit about the Strategic Advisor Board. The Strategic Advisor Board helps clients drive growth and vision in a strategic world. Focused on innovation and growth, their leadership teams possess a wide breadth of depth and experience, as well as the relationships to help business scale and thrive by providing impactful solutions to problems, no matter what they are and no matter the level of effort required to solve them. To learn more about the Strategic Advisor Board, head on to www.strategicadvisorboard.com and see what the Strategic Advisor Board can do for you. Now back to Mike. So let's get into your current role and some of your philanthropic efforts. Currently, as I understand it, you serve as a managing partner at MHR Holdings. And from what I understand, it's a faith-based affordable housing company. I'd like to set the stage and say that there's an element of equity in that, right? Affordable housing. And I'd like for you to touch a little bit, if you would, the difference between affordable and low income housing. But from an economic perspective, and how can we go down that rabbit hole, right? And but I want to focus on inclusivity because I think we can go into many different rabbit holes and talk about a lot of different things that I'm really curious about, and I'd love to bring you back and speak more on it. But from a perspective of inclusivity, excuse me, because as you know, right, in order to have a conversation about access and equity, it can't happen without inclusion. So that said, tell us about your role at MHR Holdings and the impact that you're making, and what is your end goal? What does success look like for Mike in this space?
Well, I'll tell you, to give you a little background on MHR Holdings, I mean, we are a faith-based affordable housing company. What does that mean? Interesting enough, I had this discussion the other day that faith-based, we're a Christian organization. However, we are not limited in that regard. And what I mean by that is that I have individuals who are part of our company that are from many different faith backgrounds. And again, it comes back to that whole servant leadership. Mm-hmm. We are a private equity developer. And what that means is that the housing developments in which we do are not led by the socio-political directives where you find state or federal money that directs those developments. Mm-hmm. That's what sets us apart from being a low-income housing developer, because the market is saturated with low-income housing developers. Everybody wants to provide low-income housing. But when you look at the middle class, as housing gets more and more expensive, our mission has been to provide decent, affordable housing for the segment of the market that gets excluded. Mm-hmm. If you're low income, there's all kinds of grants, and there's, community development corporations that go out and they create this housing, and they use tax credits and tons of money, federal or state money to build these developments. But for the guy who makes $1 more outside of the threshold, he's excluded. And he's the guy who's been working hard and works 2 jobs, has the 680 plus, FICO score. But because he's just at the edge, at $2,000 a month for rent in a community where he could buy a house with a $800 or $900 mortgage payment, but because of his income or because of certain factors, he's excluded. Right. That's the market that we target, those who are going to be excluded because there's these limits that are placed, government limits that are placed, and that takes us from the low income housing to affordable. And our range is wide. I mean, we've got properties on the lower end of that scale that we've developed, and then we've got some that are pretty decent as well, that meet the national averages. So. But then we have programs in place to help those individuals get into those homes. So.
Wow. I've never heard that distinction, right? Low income versus affordable housing. And thank you for that, because I learn something new every day. And so thanks. What does success look like for you in your role?
For me, and my role is just to ensure that we meet the needs of the community. And again, it goes back to servant leadership. I've got a great team of people. I mean, a phenomenal team of people. We're not a multinational company, but I've got a multinational team. I've got, an architect that works overseas. I've got a structural engineer that's overseas. I've got, part of my supply chain comes from overseas. And collectively, we're able to support one another, understanding what the big goal is. I think that success, I've already achieved that. And what I mean by that is that we've developed a company to help people. I think that's the biggest takeaway, that when people are able to get into a home that we've developed, or even our rehab for resale properties. And again, this is all private equity, to be able to do that on a scale that empowers a community to go forth and do the things that they want, where a community overall can achieve its goals. I think that's what ultimately success looks like for me and for my team.
Wow. Mike, your commitment to affordable housing and community development is truly commendable. But and don't get me wrong, that's awesome work, but I also know you do a bit more than that. And well, I'm not going to say not to, because I am going to put you on the spot, right? How do you balance all that in your professional responsibilities with all of your, the endeavors that you have, and on top of that, doing volunteering stuff like with I9 Sports, supporting charitable organizations. I understand you support organizations like the Fellowship of Christian Athletes and Harvest Family Ministries in Hawaii. I mean, you're stateside, right?
I am currently. Yeah.
Well, Mike, give me your secret. How do you do all that?
Let me say, I was in Hawaii for 16 years and have a home there. So I do go back and forth. I met an incredible, yet another entrepreneurial endeavor. I had a coffee shop out there and was able to meet some phenomenal people. And they were just incredible human beings. And they have a charitable ministry out there that addresses, for Hawaiian Islands specifically, it's a foster care ministry. And I just wanted to support what they do, and have ever since been supporting them. Fellowship for Christian Athletes is near and dear to my heart. Mm-hmm. I work with the Metro Director in the Virginia Tidewater area, actually out of Virginia Tech, and I've had great opportunities to support his ministry and what he does, and organizationally what they do, especially looking at how things are today. I9 Sports is man, I tell you, I've never been a participation trophy guy, uh-huh. But I'll tell you, the things that they do at I9 for youth is amazing in terms of building up people's self-esteem, creating leadership opportunities. Every week, and I coach flag football. I coach senior flag football, which is the 11 to 14-year-olds. And I'll tell you, it's a lot like herding cats or counseling sailors. It can be a challenge. But every week, there's a theme, and it gives you an opportunity to sit down and talk to young people, especially at that age group, because they're middle schoolers, to talk or freshmen in high school, and to be able to talk to them about leadership, about about being coachable, about sportsmanship, important values like being trustworthy, integrity. Integrity is a big one that we hit, and then allowing the team, and I think this is one of the things that's made my teams different, is allowing the team itself to select each week what team member exhibited or displayed those values, who displayed sportsmanship, who displayed integrity, respect for others. Those types of things create an environment where ultimately we're looking at the next generation of leaders, and understanding that inclusion, because inclusion is one of the weekly values, inclusion gives these young people an opportunity to start thinking differently, to start thinking on a broader scale, to develop those selfless leaders, where you give everyone a voice. And I think it's important. So those charitable organizations, those volunteer things, that community service stuff has always run true with me. And it's a phenomenal opportunity and an incredible blessing to be able to support them, participate, engage, and hopefully make a difference.
Man, that, hearing that, it reminds me of the time, when I was stationed in Hawaii and participating in that as a parent, as a coach. I9 Sports is a great organization, man, hands down. But, I can't help but think how much inclusivity at large is woven into a lot of good things. And I say that because, especially, to our listeners out there listening and tuning in, thank you first and foremost. But, inclusion isn't just a catchphrase. It's not a buzzword. It's something that can be woven. It's something that can be leveraged. It's something that can be empowering and operationalized, and scaled. And when we're talking about businesses in general, right? Obviously, right? Yes, we do a lot, a lot of businesses do a lot of good things, but at the end of the day, businesses are in business to make money. And I think inclusion is a key element of the level of success that an organization can have. Granted, money isn't everything, but when you include people, they feel heard, they feel valued. And it's not just including people, but making sure, to your point, right, that they do feel valued. Because I can say, oh yeah, I have diversity, and hey, Mike, I included you. You got a seat at the table, and guess what? I'll give you a talking part. But when you speak, am I saying, hey, that sounds insightful, but let's take that offline. I'm really interested to hear more about it. Or am I saying, okay, I let him speak. Okay, thank you. Noted. Next. That there's a difference, so I think it's important to understand what inclusion sounds like and what it feels like. And I think you really highlighted that really great. And if you can do it with kids, why can't we do it elsewhere?
I think we can. And I'll tell you, something that you said there that struck with me is about consideration of inclusion. It's not just giving someone a seat at the table, but applying that value to consider what they bring to the table. Those ideas, those thoughts, those comments are important to the collective. And, from a leadership standpoint, it's important not to discard or to downplay your stakeholders' involvement. If you understand, again, beginning with the end in mind, what the end state is, and you're able to articulate that, then each stakeholder brings an opinion. They bring something to the table, and what they bring is of value, regardless of how large or how small. With my kids, I coach a team. I have 12 kids every year. We go through 7-week seasons. Every 7 weeks, I've got 12 new kids.
Wow.
And, these kids come and they all play Madden or they watch football on TV, and they come back and they have ideas. Hey, coach, can we run this play? All right, well, let's draft it up. Let's talk about it in practice. Let's walk through this play. And it gives them an opportunity of empowerment. And I think that if you're able to empower people, inclusion is about empowerment.
Yeah, absolutely.
At the end of the day.
Absolutely.
Enterprises, volunteers for football team, for whatever. I think that's at the end of the day, that's what it's about.
Absolutely. Man, we can talk for hours about this, man. This is just, I get so, passionate about this, and I'm going to sound like a, TV infomercial or whatnot, but there's more, to Mike Richards. Let's get into a little bit of your personal interests outside of your professional and philanthropic pursuits. And one would argue that the coaching and all that is something that's more personal. But beyond that, I also understand you're an avid pilot, a golfer, and a surfer. How do these hobbies contribute to your own overall well-being, your mindset? And I'm really curious, what got you into these particular things? Because, you and I both grew up in, inner cities. And so flying, playing golf, and surfing, come on, that just never even crossed my mind. So I'm really curious to know, how you got into this and how do they contribute to your own overall well-being?
That's exactly how I got into it, because they weren't things that were typical of my community. Growing up in the inner city, and I'm a biracial guy. My mom's white, my father was black. I grew up in a community where, it was a predominantly black community, and we didn't have black pilots in the neighborhood. We didn't have any black golfers in the neighborhood, and I'm older than Tiger Woods, so it's not the Tiger Woods phenomenon. And surfing, I don't, even today, I don't know any black surfers on the pro circuit. But what I can tell you is that as growing up hearing that these aren't things that we do, they were things that were interesting to me. So why couldn't I get a pilot's license? Why couldn't I learn to fly? And, there's been some real benefit to it. And let me segue to a quick story. I won't mention the airport. I'll just say it was in Virginia. Okay. I had flown in. I had landed. It's a small general aviation airport. I had landed. I got out of the plane. I was wearing a flight suit. Maybe that's a Navy thing for me. I'd taken off my flight suit, but I was in civilian clothes, and I had left something out in the plane. So my plane's tied down, and they're fueling it up, and another guy pulled in, and he taxied over and parked next to my plane. Well, I'm walking out to get something out of my flight bag that I had left in the plane, and as I was doing that, the guy who got out of the other plane tosses me his key, and he says, "Hey, can you top this off?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, I can top it off." I said, "Can I have it?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, sure." I was like, "Well, I want to fly it." And the guy laughed at me, and he was like, "Yeah, right." And I was like, "Well, actually, I don't work here." And the assumption was that because I was black, I was grounds crew.
Wow.
so he thought I was ground crew, and I'm not the ground crew. I'm actually a pilot. And oh, by the way, that's my plane. It was a very awkward moment at first. He was very apologetic and all that, and we laughed it off. But the important thing was that it gave him an opportunity to look at, hey, you know what? Next time I pull into an airport and I'm looking at topping off, I'm not just going to assume that the black guy is the fuel guy.
Right.
He's not working in the line shack. He could be an aviator. The same thing on the golf course, where you see more and more, blacks on the golf course. I've had that occasion where people have asked me to carry their bag for them. And I was like, wow. I'm not a caddy, but I can tell you, I'll carry your bag. It's going to cost you a lot. And it breaks, but what it does is it breaks down barriers. And, the hobbies that I have are things that I really enjoy. I have a passion for flying. I've been flying now for almost 30 years. I've got several thousand hours flying. I've owned a plane and sold a plane and bought another and sold another. So I've done that in aviation. I've done that in golf. I've done it in surfing. I have more surfboards than I'm probably allowed to own. But it's all been, hobbies that I pursued that I had just found fun. But they've always given me an opportunity to have conversations with people who do not look like me.
Sure. Absolutely, man.
And
I'm thinking about, once, and you're a far better man than I am. I'm always striving to be more like Mike, right? Like the old catchphrase was. I remember, now I take them as learning opportunities for folks and just kind of giving people a different perspective. I used to, before, the internet and video calls, I remember one time in the Navy, I was going to a senior enlisted conference, and I met somebody that I had been communicating with on the phone and via email. And when I met him, he said, "You're Saul Gomez?" Yeah, the senior enlisted. Yeah, man, you look so much different than you sound like on the phone. And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, you're Hispanic, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm Mexican." He's like, "You're so well articulated. You must be one of the good ones." Mike, it took everything in me not to just deck this guy, but he just didn't know, his it was a bias, right? It's how he perceived me to be. And in his mind, he's like, how could a Mexican guy from South Central LA be a senior enlisted leader? Like, what? And he's so well articulated, right? And he doesn't know my story. And so where I otherwise would have, put hands on someone, I take those opportunities and ask pointed questions. What did you think Hispanics sound like? As opposed to what? Let's have a conversation about it. And I found a lot of times that people are not ill-intended. They're just misinformed, and they just haven't been socialized.
Absolutely. I mean, you see people who have these certain biases, implicit or unconscious,
right?
But they have these biases, and I don't think it is your job or my job to go out and tilt at windmills and break biases, change hearts and minds and kiss babies and all those things. But what I do think is that when we have the opportunity operating in that space is to present ourselves as ourselves, our authentic, true selves. And through that, that addresses inclusion, because where we would otherwise be discriminated against for whatever the reason, or specific, I should say, not whatever reason, but specific to our ethnicity. By doing that, breaking down those barriers where they come to understand, well, wait a second. No, I guess not all, Mexicans are this way, or all black people are this way, or all biracial people are this way. Not all biracial people identify like this. And,
right.
Is this a reason? And it without knowing someone, it helps break down some of those prejudices.
It absolutely does. And even on that point, right? Inclusion, it's not just a race and gender thing, right? Or an ethnicity thing. It's if you think of the military, the Navy, right? It's the submarine community, the aviation community. It's your IT people, your HR people. It's people with disabilities, people that are blind, people that, all kind of different people, and, all kind of different skill sets. It's really about building truly inclusive environments, because I think there's always something to be had. Even if I don't necessarily, hit the I believe button on certain things, at least I walk away with the perspective that I otherwise would not have had. And I think there's value add in that. And I think that can't be overstated.
No, not at all. And let me add to what you said there, especially about the military, because the military has always been looked at as this social experiment. The key thing that comes with military service is that, at least for the Navy, for the first, and I think it's 10 weeks now, it was 8 weeks when I enlisted, but for that first 8 weeks of boot camp, and this is, not unique to the Navy, this is across all services. Mm-hmm. Through boot camp, you were forced to live in an environment. The military enlists people from all four corners of the nation.
Right. And
they bring with them their biases and prejudice, good and bad, good biases, bad biases, and their prejudice. They bring their culture with them, and they're forced to live together. And when I went to the Navy boot camp, it was 84 of us, and from all parts of the country. Mm-hmm. And we learned to work as a unit.
Right.
We learned to work as a team, and we learned to work together. But where the real test comes is after boot camp.
Yeah.
When, for Navy, when we go to the fleet, when you go out to the fleet, you're no longer forced. You can, as a Mexican guy coming out of boot camp, you can just hang out with all the other Mexican guys on the ship or at the squadron or, at your short command. As a black guy, I can hang out with but we don't, because we tend to break down those differences and understand that we're all sailors, or we're all soldiers, or we're all Marines. Is there some overlap? Absolutely, because there's some familiarity there, some understanding that lies within culture, some appreciation. But no longer is it, I'm just going to congregate with this type of individual. I'm just going to hang out with the guys who are space nerds. I'm right. just going to hang out with the nukes. I'm just going to hang out with CB.
Right.
We find that we break down those barriers. And once those barriers are broken down, and I think that happens for the vast majority of people who have served while on active duty and veterans alike.
Absolutely. Absolutely, man. As we near the end of our conversation, I want to ask, for our listeners, is there any advice or any insight you can share with them on how to foster more inclusivity within their own respective capacities, and what challenges might they face and how to mitigate them?
Don't be afraid to fail. It goes back to that. Don't be afraid to open your mind and communicate with people. If you approach something, from a genuine point of view, I mean, with honesty, integrity, and you come with clear intent, even if you say something dumb or do something dumb, again, that failure is not fatal. It's something that you can become. The standing joke, I think there's a couple of comedians that talk about using the N-word. Well, if you're in the right environment and you're having a conversation, first, I don't think the word's appropriate at all. Mm-hmm. However, I say that to say that if you're sitting down and you want to have a conversation about that, why is that so offensive? What is the problem? Why is it that, black guys can call each other that, but nobody else can? Right. Have that conversation, break down those barriers, and not just for racial things, but, across the board. Why is it that, when I look at MHR Holdings, a faith-based company, that's why we don't say we're Christian-based, because,
right.
We're not all Christians, but, can I ask the question, of the two folks who work for me out of Egypt or work with me, I should say, excuse me, for them, they're Muslims. So, can you tell me about Ramadan? Can you explain it to me? How I can get better understanding?
Right.
And break down some of those stereotypes, break down some of the division, break down some of those biases, because I think it's more often than not, it's biases that lead it. And I think that people you have to stop being afraid. Don't be afraid of the dark. Don't be afraid of differences. Don't be afraid of, there's no boogeyman in the closet. There really isn't.
Absolutely.
And do it with positive intent. And you will find that, there's a lot of love in the world.
Awesome, man. How insightful. If you don't mind sharing, what projects do you have going on right now that you can share? And if people are interested, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting because we're a private equity development firm. So, our projects we select,
mm-hmm.
So it's not like we're a retail outlet or where someone's reaching out. I mean, if they want to reach out to me, they can get me at mrichards@mhrholdingsllc.com. That's my email address, and I'm always available. Right now, we're working on a couple of projects. We're doing some things in Pittsburgh. We're doing some things on the Big Island of Hawaii, where we're looking at addressing some homeless challenges. Hawaii, one of the most beautiful states in the union, has an incredible problem with homelessness. And, it just touches our heart that we want to go over and do something to help address that. They've had a number of initiatives. Again, these are government led. And, just our position is that it's not always about the government funding and limitations. We have the resources to be able to come in and do something different, and we'll partner with organizations in the community to support them. So that's how we're leading. And we're doing the same thing in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has a similar challenge, and we're looking at building right now 24 homes in Pittsburgh to support the community. And this is hopefully going to be an incubator. They don't have the type of housing that we're building currently. So we're going to bring a new concept in, and we're going to try to get our LEED certification because we're looking at a green project so that we're addressing a number of needs that we've heard from the community in terms about sustainability and green projects. So that's what we're working on. That's our goal there. But again, it's driven by, what folks want.
Yeah. Man, I'm always blown away talking to you, man. We don't get to talk as much as I like, but when we do, man, I'm always just floored. I love you, brother. Thanks for sharing your insights with us today. As always, you have a refreshing, fun, and inspirational energy to be around, and it's always a treat sharing space with you, brother.
Brother, I got to tell you, it is an honor that you would consider me. Absolutely. I mean, I have incredible and profound respect for you, what you're doing, your work, your body of work is amazing. And, maybe your listeners don't know, but I know a little bit of your backstory, and I have had the opportunity and above all things, the honor to have served with you at a point. And man, I tell you, I've learned so much from you. So the things that you see in me are a reflection of you, my brother. And I appreciate you. And thank you for having me.
Mike, likewise. Thank you for that. And I'd love to have you back if you're willing to. I'd like to hear what other projects you have on. So your availability permitting, I'd love to have you back.
Always available to you.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Thank
Folks,
you.
That's Mike Richards. And that does it for this episode. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Inclusivity EQ Podcast. Until next time, stay open-minded, be curious, and continue to build your own Inclusivity EQ. I'm your host, Saul Gomez. Catch you on the flip side. Out here.
Thanks for listening to the Inclusivity EQ Podcast with Saul Gomez. Please leave your feedback and visit strategicadvisorboard.com to get the latest and greatest business advisement on the planet. Follow us on social media for updates, and we will see you on the next episode.